Hello and welcome to My Living Room. I'm Kathleen Hershner. The purpose of this show, My Living Room, is to have normal conversations in English, in normal conversational English, showing viewers the way people really talk. I'm talking a little bit slower to you now so that you can understand me in the beginning. But once you get used to my accent, I think that you'll find that you can understand me even better if you keep listening. You may be wondering a little bit about why I call this show My Living Room. Well, the story actually has its background in radio. I started a radio program about 3.5 years ago on Vaughn Radio called Women on the Rise. In the beginning, the show was supposed to be a woman's talk show, talking about women's issues, women in business, what are women doing in Madrid, international women's issues, this type of thing. But after a couple of months of hosting the show and having interviews with women, I decided that I didn't want to limit myself to just women. I really wanted to interview people, not women, not men, but people. And so over the course of 3.5 years, the show has changed from being a woman's show, Women on the Rise, to really more of a people are talking type of format. And the purpose of the radio program is to conduct interviews with people in English, in conversational English, English spoken in the way that people really speak. People change subjects a lot when they're speaking in English. They don't say, okay, for 5 minutes we're going to talk about your job. Stop. Now, for the next 10 minutes, let's talk about your family. People don't talk like that. People talk in a very fluid way, in any language, not just English, not just Spanish, but in all languages. People change subjects. So in the beginning, my boss was worried that people wouldn't understand us because we were speaking English at a much faster rate of speech. But what happened was that people, I think, either became used to the way I was talking or the way my guests were talking, or they decided to listen to the show and try to understand as much of the English as they could. And that's one of the tactics that I've used when living in Spain to try to learn Spanish. The most important thing for me in the past year has been to relax and just to listen to people speaking in Spanish. I know I'm not going to understand everything they say, so I don't try to anymore. I try to understand about 50% if I'm lucky. Sometimes I understand a little bit less, sometimes I understand a little bit more, depending on the subject, if it's something I know, depending on the person, if they are talking too fast or if they're talking slowly enough for me to understand, and also depending on whether I'm tired or I feel good. You can understand a little better when you're more relaxed, when you're not so tired. Sometimes if I've had a couple of drinks, I understand Spanish a lot better. So that's why I've taken the format of the radio program and essentially I'm trying to give it a more visual format. So we'll see if we're successful over the course of the next few months. You might be wondering who I am, where I'm from, why I talk like this, how I can talk like this, how can a person talk so much about themselves without stopping? Well, part of that has to do with my background. I'm from the United States. I'm from the middle of the United States, a state called Kansas. It's in an area of the United States we call the Midwest because it's in the middle. It's not in the West. It's in the middle, but we call it the Midwest. I don't know why. Anyway, I grew up there, I went to university there, but the thing that I always wanted to do was leave home. I couldn't wait to get out of the Midwest. I wanted to go to a big city, either New York City or Los Angeles or San Francisco. Anyway, I ended up in San Francisco after a few years. And I worked as a sales representative for pharmaceutical companies. I worked for Pfizer, I worked for Abbott, companies that you probably recognize. But that was a little bit strange because my background when I was in university was in studying the performing arts. I was a voice major, I was a singer, I was a piano player, I was involved in music theater. My whole life was about performing. I was a performer. And so I went to a performing arts school my second year of university in Boston, and I studied music theater. I thought that I was going to be on Broadway. A lot of people who knew me thought that I had potential. Well, one thing that I learned about the music theater business, or in the performing arts business in general, is that it's very, very, very competitive. And only the top 2% of all people who want to be successful in the performing arts, whether it's film, whether it's music, singing, dancing, any number of areas of performing arts, only a certain percentage of people are actually successful. Some of them are lucky, but most of them are supremely talented. And I didn't feel that I had that degree of talent. So when I went to San Francisco, I thought to myself, how do you take a performing arts background with an English degree and translate that into a career, one that you can make money in and you can have a more normal life. You don't have to worry about where your next paycheck is coming from. Well, for me, sales was an easy solution to this problem. I could take all of the abilities that I had, the ability to talk extemporaneously, which means to think while you're talking, to be able to speak like I'm doing with you now, without having a script, without having to think, what am I going to talk about next? Well, salespeople learn this. It's a learned skill. It's not something you're born with. And I learned how to do this. And so I was lucky. I ended up with a career in sales. I made a fair amount of money, which is not to say I made a lot of money. I'm not wealthy. But I made enough money after doing that for 10 years to change careers. And so I decided to stop being a sales representative and move to another country. So I thought to myself, well, how can I move to another country and make money if I don't speak any other languages? Well, I can try to learn Spanish. So I tried to learn Spanish. I took Spanish classes for 3 months at a company in San Francisco, and I didn't learn anything. I had a different teacher every class. I didn't understand anything. I learned a little bit of vocabulary, but I never learned how to speak. The reason I never learned how to speak is because I was living in an English-speaking environment, and I wasn't practicing speaking Spanish with anyone because I didn't have any Spanish friends. So after 3 months, I decided this is not working. I think what I'll do is become an English as a second language teacher. So I went back to school for a year, got a degree in teaching English as a second language at the University of California in Berkeley. And my first job was supposed to be in Turkey. Well, people don't speak Spanish in Turkey, obviously, but I had no idea that 911 was about ready to happen. The week that I was supposed to go to Istanbul, Turkey, to teach English for an academy, we had the Twin Towers bombing. And so I called the teacher, the owner of the company in Turkey, and I said, I don't think that this is a very good time to come to Turkey. Nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew anything at that point. And so I decided to go to Hawaii instead, because my brother lived in Hawaii. He was in the military there. Well, they don't speak Spanish in Hawaii either. So once again, my attempts to try to learn Spanish had to be put on the back burner, as we say in English. They had to be postponed until later. I went to Hawaii and I started teaching English as a second language in language schools in Honolulu. Now that may seem like a strange thing because Honolulu is in the United States and English is the official language of the state of Hawaii. But one thing I didn't know is that a lot of people come from Asian countries, from Japan, from Korea, from China, from Vietnam, from the Pacific Island region. They come to Hawaii to learn English. You may say, well, why did they come to Hawaii to learn English? Why don't they just go to the United States? Well, Hawaii is one of the states of the United States. It's much more fun to go to Hawaii to learn English than it is to go all the way to San Francisco, to go to California to try to learn English. And I think it's also a little bit less expensive in terms of the cost of the flight. You can fly from Japan to Honolulu for less money than you can from Japan to California. So many people from Asian-speaking countries come to Hawaii to learn English. It's a great environment for learning a language. It's relaxing, the weather is perfect, the people are friendly, everybody speaks English for the most part, but if you need a break, if you need to speak an Asian language, you can probably find someone in Honolulu that speaks either Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, Vietnamese, Japanese, any language that is like that can be found in Honolulu. So I was there for about a year when I decided to, actually I didn't decide, I had a break in my teaching schedule. I had 6 weeks free to do whatever I wanted. So I thought to myself, well, what am I going to do for 6 weeks? I enjoy living in Hawaii, but I already do everything that I want to do here. I go to the beach, I go sailing, I lay out in the sun, I relax. I want to do something different. And so I found an opportunity on the internet to go to an English immersion program as a volunteer to speak to Spanish people for 10 days. And this was called Vontown. Many of you have heard of this. So I went to Spain from Hawaii on a 17-hour flight. And when I got to Madrid, I stayed in a hostel, and then I was picked up by the bus to go to Puerto de Gredos on Sunday. So I had a couple of days free to walk around Madrid, to go to the art museums, to enjoy some of what I hoped would be a pleasant experience for me. I wasn't sure. I didn't know what to expect. When you go to a foreign country, you have no idea what to really expect. You can read all you want about the country. You can even try to learn a little bit of the language. But if you don't actually go there and experience the cultural immersion in the country, you'll never know what to expect. So for 10 days, I hung out with, or I entertained myself with a bunch of Spanish people in a little town near Avila. And I had such a great time that I knew I had to come back to Spain. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I knew that at some point I would return to Spain. I was exhausted at the end of 10 days. Not only was I exhausted, but I was dealing with jet lag, which made me very, very tired on the third day. After I finished the program, which at that time was 10 days long, long time, even longer for the Spaniards who were trying to learn English, I traveled around Spain, and I had a great time. For a couple of weeks, I went to as many places as I could. I went to Barcelona, I went to San Sebastian, I went to Santiago de Compostela, and then I eventually returned to Madrid and had to go back to Hawaii. But when I went back to Hawaii and began teaching again, I felt like a different person. I felt as though the 4 weeks, the 1 month, that I spent in Spain had a very positive effect, not only on the way I felt about myself, but also in the way that I related to people who were trying to learn English. My perspective had changed. I felt a lot more empathy and sympathy for the tremendous effort that people were making in trying to learn a language which I didn't have to learn. English is a complicated language, and I felt great relief that I wasn't having to learn English, that I was fortunate to have been born in a country where English was my language. Because I saw all of the Spanish people trying so hard to learn English, and they were exhausted at the end of the 10-day marathon of trying to learn the language, that when I went back and spent time with my students in Hawaii, I was more patient, I think. I was more understanding. I was much more, I appreciated their efforts much more. I think I had more respect for them in terms of what they were trying to do. Asian languages are so different from English. It must be very, very difficult to learn English. The grammar construction is almost the reverse as it is in English. And it was really gratifying for me to see that my experience in Spain actually had made me a better teacher. And I mean, I don't know if I am a better teacher. I don't teach anymore, but for that period of time, I think I was a better teacher. Eventually, I decided to come back to Spain after spending another 6 months teaching in Hawaii. I had what we call in English itchy feet. I wanted to travel some more. I enjoyed living in paradise, but even paradise has its limitations. When the weather is always beautiful, and the food is always fresh, and the people are always friendly, and you always wear the same clothes all year long, it becomes a little redundant. I felt like I wanted a different experience. So I contacted the people at Vaughan Systems, the company that was running the program, and I asked them if I could come back, and they said, sure, whenever you want. So I went back to Spain. I returned to Spain in August, intending to stay for another month. I thought I would do the same thing that I did before. I'd do a 10-day program, and then I'd travel around. Well, I did that. Instead, this time, I went down to Sevilla. I traveled in Andalusia a little bit. I went to Granada. I rented a car. I drove through the Alpujarras and saw a different part of Spain, which was completely different from the one that I had seen before. And so I did the same thing again, only the difference this time was that after my month was finished, I decided not to return to the United States. I made sort of a spontaneous decision to not go home. I thought, well, I'm going to stay here for a couple more months, and see if I can maybe get a job. You know, maybe somebody needs my experience as an English teacher here in Spain. At that time, learning English in Spain was not as, there weren't as many opportunities then as there are now. It was just beginning. The interest in learning English was just starting to accelerate at that time. And so I didn't really know if I was going to have success in finding a job, but I did. Little by little, I was able to get a few more teaching hours and teach enough to where I was making enough money to pay for my rent, to pay for my food, to be able to go out and have a little bit of entertainment, and to enjoy a certain quality of life. After I'd been doing that for about 6 months, I decided that I wanted to try to have my own radio program. I knew about Vaughan Radio, and I thought, well, hey, I have performing arts background. I've been on stage in front of thousands of people. I've never been on the radio, but I used to do radio commercials when I was in university. I know how to talk a lot, and I don't think that I'm afraid of trying something new. Well, I didn't think I was afraid, but the first day that I started the radio program, Women on the Rise, I was extremely nervous. I was worried about what was going to come out of my mouth. My problem was that I was thinking too much. I was thinking ahead. I was trying to think, okay, what am I going to say after I finish this sentence? What am I going to talk about next? How am I going to keep this going for an hour? And this went on for about 4 weeks. I was interviewing people, but I was worried most of the time. What if they stop talking? What am I going to say? How am I going to keep them talking? What if they don't want to talk to me? I was absolutely terrified most of the time. I was worried. I started listening to the recordings, which was a very painful experience. I listened to the recordings of the radio program. It was torturous. I hated it. I hated the sound of my voice. I hated some of the things that I'd say. I would listen to the recordings and say, why are you saying that? That's so stupid. Shut up, shut up, shut up, stop. But I just kept going. I figured if I get through another month, maybe it will be better. Maybe I'll be less afraid. Maybe I will be able to relax. Maybe, just maybe, I'll be able to be successful. And so from that point forward, I took what I called the 1 month at a time approach. Not 1 day at a time, not 1 week at a time. I decided to take it 1 month at a time, to start the month and say, okay, I'm going to do 3 shows a week, 4 weeks, that's 12 shows. I'm going to get through the month, and I'm going to reassess my recordings at the end of the month. I'm not going to listen to them during the month. I'm going to wait until the month has passed, and then I'm going to sit down and listen to them. Then I'm going to listen to the recordings from the first month, and I'm going to see if there's any improvement at all. And well, there was. Little by little, I noticed that I was becoming more relaxed. I wasn't trying to think so much. What was happening, I think, is that I was learning to trust myself. I was learning to trust in my training. I'd had a lot of training. To not be afraid, to let some of who I am come through on the program so that people could get to know me, so that people who are trying to learn English might be interested in listening to the program if I'm saying something that's worth listening to. If I just talked about myself, if I just talked about my guests, I don't know I didn't think that was going to be very interesting. I thought to myself, okay, you have to talk about things that interest you as a person. So I started talking about subjects that interest me. Horses, dogs, music, my opinions about things in the United States, my reactions to cultural differences between Spain and the United States. The three things I wasn't supposed to talk about were sex, politics, and religion. And so I thought, okay, that's all right. I'm not interested in politics. I'm not particularly interested in religion. But I thought the idea of being able to talk about relationships, not really sex for sex sake, but to talk about relationships seems like something that I should be able to do. If you can do it with a sense of taste, and you don't do it in an offensive way, and you don't do it for any sort of sordid or gratifying purposes. If you talk about it the way a doctor might talk to you about sensitive subjects, I think that it could be done. So little by little, I started having a little bit more relationship talk on the show. If I had a woman guest, we would talk about relationships, maybe talk about her situation with dating men, dating Spanish men, dating foreign men. What's it like? How do people conduct themselves in relationships? And so it almost started to feel as though I was having a relationship radio program. Actually, I think that's what it is most of the time. I think it's either talking about relationships or I talk about my opinions. Sometimes I get into trouble because I'm very opinionated. A lot of American people are very free with their opinions and the things that they want to talk about. And when you're living in another country, when you're in another culture, you have to be careful about how you talk about things. You have to be more sensitive. You don't really know how people are going to react to the things you're saying. So I've learned over the years to become a little more careful about what I say and how I say it. When I give an opinion that I think might offend someone, I always say on the radio, look, this is my opinion. If you don't agree with me, please call me. Call into the radio station right now. I'll talk to you live on the air and we can have an argument if you want to. I don't want people to agree with me. Most of my friends don't agree with me. I don't surround myself with people who think like I do. That's boring. I'm not interested in that. And so that's what I'm trying to do with this show, My Living Room. I think I'm trying to take the radio program out of the radio station, put it into a comfortable surrounding, something like this, that looks like a living room, and try to conduct the same kind of interviews with the same type of conversation, at the same rate of speech, with the same subjects, but in a visual format. And that's why I don't feel very nervous today, because I have had a lot of practice over the past 3.5 years on the radio talking. And I know that it will only get better. If I look at this program, the first one, after I have done 20 or 30, I'll probably say to myself, oh my God, why did I say that? That's terrible. But I know that it will get better. And I think that if you're willing to listen on a regular basis, you'll get used to my voice, you'll get used to the way I'm speaking, you'll get used to some of the topics that I like to talk about, and maybe you'll find that your English comprehension will improve. So that's the whole idea behind My Living Room. To take the radio show and put it in a comfortable environment where not only I feel relaxed and my guests feel relaxed, but maybe you'll be relaxed and maybe you'll be interested enough to continue to listen to this program, to continue to try to improve your English comprehension poco a poco, little by little, moment by moment. Hang in there. I promise that if you trust me and you get to know me, that I think you'll find that your English will improve. And maybe my Spanish will improve too. Who knows? Stay tuned for more. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming to My Living Room. I've enjoyed having you. Bye-bye.